Good afternoon, everyone. Recently, you might have noticed that Pope Francis has been rather active and causing a bit of a stir in the headlines. Have you seen those headlines? Some of it has been a bit confusing for a few, especially the secular media. If you read what the Pope said, and read it carefully, you can see that what the Pope is doing is that he's inviting the Church to emphasize the basics. He's saying to us that there are priorities in the proclamation of the faith. He's saying, and I quote, "The proclamation of the saving love of God comes before moral and religious imperatives." In other words, the Church looks awfully funny, if you will, in her preaching if all we talk about are the commandments and about the moral life. He's saying we have to approach it with a new balance and make sure that the first proclamation, the most fundamental one about our faith, is the saving act of Christ for us. Then, and only then, the Pope says, can you draw those moral consequences. I would add, then and only then, when people are really convicted and convinced of the essentials of their faith, can they then live the commandments well? The Holy Father is not at all saying that we shouldn't be preaching about moral issues. Abortion, as he said a few days later, is still murder. It's still the taking of innocent human life. Same-sex marriage is still redefining marriage. Contraception still distorts marital love. But these issues can't be understood, accepted, and lived without first proclaiming and receiving the living faith in Jesus Christ, who saves us. In other words, faith first, and then living that faith in the moral life. That brings us, I think, to our readings today, which are all about the basics of faith. You know, there was a young man who once thought he knew what faith was all about. And he needed $100 for soccer camp. So he thought that if he just wrote a letter with a lot of faith to God, he'd get $100 from God. So he writes this letter, sends it to God, and the post office, because it was addressed to God, I guess, they opened it up. They were kind of impressed by the young man's request. So they sent it to the President of the United States. The President, impressed by this request, and thinking that $5 would be enough to impress this young man, he wrote out a personal check for $5 and sent it to him. The young man got the $5 and decided to write a thank you note. He said, "Dear God, thank you for your $5. I noticed that you had to send it through Washington. My dad said the other $95 was the tax. Thank you for the attempt anyway. Your loving son, Johnny." Right? Now, that of course is kind of an unusual way of looking at faith, right? A little bit more selfish, but anyway, little faith of a child. In our readings today, I think we get a very profound reflection on true faith. In the first reading that John read from the prophet Habakkuk, we find this prophet complaining. He's complaining about the desolate condition of the people of Israel. They are plagued by violence, and they themselves have been unfaithful to the covenant. It seems to the prophet Habakkuk that evil has triumphed, and God has not answered their call. But God then answers the prophet and says, if it delays, that is, his help, his salvation, if it delays, wait for it. It will surely come, God says. It will not be late. The rash one has no integrity, but the just one because of his faith, shall live. In other words, faith needs to be patient. Faith waits assured that God will answer in his time, in his way. Indeed, faith assures us that God is on our side even in the midst of difficulties, trials, and desolation. Just be patient. Then we move to the second reading, where St. Paul advises Timothy to be fearless. And there's another characteristic of faith. Faith is not afraid of anything. He tells Timothy, "For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but bear your share of hardship for the gospel with the strength that comes from God." In other words, for you and for me, no hardship, no cross, no persecution, no test can match the power of our faith in Jesus Christ. Faith is not only patient, it's fearless. Finally, we find in the gospel, at the very beginning, the apostles come to our Lord, and what is their prayer? They say, "Increase our faith." Audace nobis fidem in Latin. Increase our faith. Faith is patient. Faith is fearless. Faith is also a gift. A gift for which we must beg the Lord constantly, every day. And it is a gift that is more valuable than any possession that you and I could ever have, including $100 for a soccer camp. Faith is the source of our hope. Faith is what is lived in every act of charity. Faith is at the root of our entire life. And with this gift, and really we need to ask constantly for this gift, even the impossible becomes possible. Our Lord says, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, "Be uprooted and planted in the sea," and it would obey you. Faith is patient. Faith is fearless. Faith is the greatest gift that we could possibly have. Finally, I want to extend to you an invitation to come to the school of faith. This school opens at the end of Mass, and it's called 40 Hours. It is the very place in front of the Blessed Sacrament, with our Lord present with us, radiating his mercy and grace upon us, that we can ask, Lord, for this fearless, patient gift that we call faith. If you struggle to be patient with God's will, if there are many things that cause you to fear, if you see the need, as the apostles did, for an increase in your faith, come. Come at any moment of the day, over the next 3 days. Come to this school of faith, and the Lord will answer you.